Welcome to the All Stats No Res podcast. If you are watching this on YouTube, this is going to be a podcast, so there's not going to be any or many pretty pictures. We're just going to be a bunch of guys talking.
This is going to be the premiere Dominions 5 multiplayer podcast. My name is Articulatemis, aka Soron's Dominions Daddy.
I am HP Munchkincraft. You might know me as the guy who posts all the pictures of foxes in immersion.
I'm Darkwolf, and I have to include my TM that I am not a furry.
And I am Soron, and he's not my dad. It definitely got me started, but...
There you go. So what is this podcast going to be about? Well, we all came together and had an idea to do a podcast about just very specific, granular things that we think the overall Dominions community might be interested in talking about. We're all obviously individual players. We all have our own takes on, how we view the game, and we kind of want to share that those unique views with the, like I said, the overall community. So
This podcast.
we feel like there's not enough content out there, so we kind of want to bring
this podcast
our
is
flavor to the board.
This podcast is about spicy takes on how the rest of you are wrong about Dominions.
Yeah, that's the other part. We accept any comments. We accept. Eventually, we'll get an email section up. But for the time being, any comments in the YouTube section, we'll address on the following. All right. So for our first episode, our top's going to be M.A. Marignon Witch Hunter. So the Commander Witch Hunter, the Mage Priest, and that leads into our first segment, which is going to be Pog or Dog. So whether or not we think it's good or bad. I personally think that the Witch Hunter is serviceable, so I think it's more so on the Pog side than on the Dog side. It's not perfect. But what about you, HP?
I also think this is on the Pog side, but I think Soron might disagree with me.
Yeah, so I'm going to rally with the community here and various members and call it by its proper name, the Shit Hunter, and I think it's one of the worst fire mages you can recruit in the game.
I don't think the Witch Hunter is one of the worst fire mages in the game, but I definitely think it's something that is just pretty dog all around.
Well, first of all, I'm going to have to call out Soron because he normally disagrees with a lot of the community's takes, but in this particular instance, he agrees with it. So, honestly, for what your main reasoning from what we talked about before is that you feel like it's overcosted. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, it's definitely overcosted for what you're getting in both respects of being a fire mage and an astral mage.
Okay, so, I mean, if you cut out the astral and make it cheaper appropriately, does that really make it a better mage? I don't think the astral is the problem here, right?
Well, the problem is it's your workhorse mage for the nation, right? And it's your only option, really. You do have the initiates, but they're not the workhorse mage. You're generally going to be making the Witch Hunters no matter what throughout the course of the game as Marignon.
So,
That's true.
so I want to jump in on the Pog side a little bit here. That's why I think it's good. It is the mage that has to carry Marignon through the mid and into the late game, and it does it. So clearly is a Pog mage. Even if it's overcosted, even if it's got Holy Pass, even if it can be magic dueled, still puts up the wins for the nation.
I think that statement though is kind of loaded because it carries Marignon into the mid and late game because people playing Marignon have no other choice. I'd argue the Knights of the Chalice is what keeps them afloat. And I think you can take the fire paths out and switch them with, I'll say, the vast majority of other paths, and they would do a better part carrying the nation into the mid and late game. So I don't think you can say that is an advantage of the mage. It's just something it has to do.
So I don't necessarily disagree, but I think we all know that obviously Illwinter, when they do design, they're going to design what they think is cool or thematic first, and balance comes second to that, right? We can all agree on that?
Generally, yeah.
Yeah, generally.
Yeah.
Okay. But I think also we can agree on that the general consensus is that M.A. Marignon is, it's fairly strong. It's a pretty strong nation, right?
Moderately strong.
It's moderately.
It's average.
I think in certain lobbies it's going to be stronger than other nations. It really depends on the skill level. Maybe a low skill lobby, it's a power, but in a higher skill lobby, it might not be as powerful. But it does have a lot of things you can do.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it has a higher skill floor and maybe a lower skill ceiling than some of the other powerhouses in Middle Age. Middle Age has a lot of great nations. Um, but it's, as I said in the intro, I think it's perfectly serviceable as a workhorse mage. I mean, I don't have too many complaints about it. Yes, would it have as a role player, would it have be better with better paths? Absolutely. But I don't think witch hunters are holding back Marignon. And Marignon, as a nation identity, is mostly relying on their sacreds anyways. They're recruiting their sacreds. So the whatever mage you put in there is kind of like icing on top of the cake, right?
Here's where I'll disagree. I think why I disagree with that is because the mage doesn't really elevate the other options of the nation. It's more of like it's with fire. Fire is a path that you do damage with. You summon fire elementals. It doesn't really have a lot of buff potential. You do have the S1 for buffing, but if you're using the Witch Hunter to buff and elevate your sacreds or your units, it's not a good use of your gold. So saying that it helps elevate the nation is kind of misleading because your sacreds are going to do a lot of the killing for you throughout the game, especially in the early game. And fire doesn't really help you address those issues, in my opinion.
I don't agree with the idea that it doesn't elevate the nation. I mean, in the first place, any astral nation can communion into things like big mass luck spell that I forgot its name in the middle of the podcast.
Battle Fortune.
No, the bigger
Battle
one.
Fortune?
No,
Will of the Fates.
Will of the Fates. And in the sacred, the omni-resist meta that we find ourselves in, simply just firestorming your own fire res morons is like a good, easy synergy that it has now in the resist meta we have. They will probably also have fire resist sacreds and try to resist you, but you take what you can get with this nation. So I think like he has to carry a lot, and he does.
Something I want to add on to that as well is I think general consensus, which I agree with, is that fire as a path is a little bit weaker than a lot of the other paths, right?
Yeah.
But you can't just decrease the. I mean, you could, but Illwinter is not going to decrease the cost of the mage just because it has fire in the path. Like that wouldn't be according to their design philosophy. So.
Well, yeah, but it doesn't matter because the mage is still bad because it is fire, and you have to evaluate the power of a mage based on what it is.
But you also mentioned that it was the worst fire mage, or one of the worst.
One of the worst.
So what are better fire mages then, I guess, to compare it to?
Okay, so there's in the various ages with just fire. So if we go to LA, the if I'm pronouncing this right, the Hermorphat, which is the F1 with the chance of F3 or F2, F1, N1. For 90 gold, you're paying way better. In EA, you can go to the Augur, which is 65 gold for similar paths that allow you to commune potential. That is 65 gold, but it's not F2. But it's significantly cheaper. But it is not sacred. Like, F2 in general is overcosted in Dominions. It's not a good path. Like, you use it with the nation you are, and there's when you pick a nation, you got to use your tools, but just having it in general is like as your only option is not good.
Well, I actually disagree. I don't think you can look down on a nation because its mainline is F2. I just think it's a situation where the mage itself doesn't bring much to the table that other mages don't bring better, especially in a mainline role. It's just kind of, I don't want to say it makes the nation worse, but it just kind of forces your play in a certain direction. Because you can look at other mages that have, like, you can look at the paths separately, like, S, F, and together you get Solar Eclipse, but that's about it. Like, early game, there isn't that much to be gained from shooting your combat mages up F through a communion.
So, I want to kind of address a little bit of a different line in that MA Ulm is another nation that has to rely on a single mage, basically. Like, it's just got one main mage, the Mastersmith, which is a yoked mage, which is a very good mage, but MA Ulm does, as people will tell you over and over, struggle in the late game, relying even on this, like, very, very good mage, right? But Marignon which has to rely on this like supposedly terrible mage, is better in the late game because of that astral path and because of the communions you can drop this mage into. So I really don't feel like he could be as bad as the community thinks.
Well, no, I strictly disagree with you. Having the Master Smith in the late game versus the Witch Hunter is night and day. Like the magic you have available to you throughout the game and how it scales matters. So like Earth as a path, as you go later into the game, you get stuff like Marble Warriors, you get Army of Gold, you get Maws of the Earth. These are all fantastic spells that are good. Fire does not scale like that. Your fire spells, as you scale, you hit fire elementals, you got Solar Eclipse. These are mid-game things. You eventually will get Firestorm, which is good. And then you get a lot of nothing. You have Incinerate for removal, but that's still early game. Your level 7s and your level 6s, you get jack shit.
Well, hold on. He's not talking about the fire scaling though. HP was talking about the astral scaling.
You don't get,
but the fire's the big scaling part. Like you do get the S, but the S, like what? You have Will of the Fates, you got Luck, you got Body Ethereal,
got
and then
Doom.
you have the Thaumaturgy stuff. But it's harder to cast the S.
I think the Witch Hunter wears a lot of hats, and it's definitely not the most cost-efficient mage. You are paying a bit of gold for some of the extra stuff it's getting, like the base leadership 40. You're getting that patrol bonus, obviously that one priest level. But I think there are creative ways you can kind of utilize all those little things. Yeah, if you look at it specifically as like you want a specialist, you're definitely overpaying.
Yeah.
I think when we say workhorse, we mean like you're going to pump out as many of these as possible, and a lot of them are going to have different jobs.
Well,
I think they're serviceable in that regard.
They're going to have different jobs, absolutely, but when you're using them as an astral mage, you are paying way too much, and if you're using them as leaders, that's just inefficient. You could use them as patrolling, but I would highly argue that, like, yes, they do splash in the astral, you're going to make a lot of them, but you don't like paying 185 gold to do the jobs of astral or breaking you in the, let's say you had Matrix and you brought in nature, because you're gonna do that as Marion if you're playing the nation. Like, you using the Witch Hunter as the catalyst is always going to be a disadvantage versus other nations who have cheaper astral mages. Like, the fire and the holy that you're paying for, like doing the job for like astral, you're just overpaying way too. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It makes sense. I just want to go into a little bit of the earlier thing you said about not having late game fire. I just wanted to bring up the very excellent, granted, Pillar of Fire. Granted, it is at an 8. It is Evo 8, which is pretty up there, pretty hard to get to. But the fact that your guys like do a bunch of stuff in the mid game. And even in the early game, although you are overpaying for a Body Ethereal caster, I think it's justifiable given how good your Sacreds are. If the enemy is unprepared for that, you're going to do it, and you're going to beat them. But like in the late game, you get into like Pillar of Fire, and all of a sudden they can kill through even very heavy fire resist, and they turn into very good artillery on top of what they were doing in the mid game, and you could just do switch ups with them.
Okay.
What were they doing in the mid game? Practically jack shit. Like,
I mean, flaming arrows, right? They can point buff.
Don't name flaming arrows. It's an option, but
name flaming arrows. Let's get the Dom floor grind set.
Like you're better off naming stuff like Fallen Fires over flaming arrows. But
they can do both.
Yeah, they can do it, but it's not. Really
you can't have your cake and eat it too. We on the all res meta, as you talked about earlier. What is your Falling Fires and your Flaming Arrows going to do? And what are you going to cast Flaming Arrows on? Your crossbows?
Yeah, Pillar Fire will not be cast.
I mean, why not?
The archers.
Dude, you don't have any gold because you're spending all your gold on fucking shit hunters.
Well,
I mean, they will have gold.
That is true, but at least the sacred upkeep is a little bit lower, right?
So the issue with fire, let me bring this. So you bring up Pillar of Fire, right? The issue with Pillar of Fire, even in the all resist meta, if you run into someone with fire resist, I'm pretty confident to say that your mages will still not fire at those units with fire res, despite the damage threshold going over. I'm fairly confident it will not fire. So it's basically a dead spell, and it only hits chaff. So really, like when you get the flames from the sky, and let's say somehow you have the boosters to cast it, fire's great, but there's way too big of a window between your level 5 and your level 8 to get a spell. That's the big problem with fire. We're not going to take Krun's point here and say fireball and stuff. It carries you through the early game.
Absolutely not.
That stuff is fireball is dog. It's a
No,
little bit better nowadays with the AI update, but
Listen, fire. I think most people agree that fire is probably the weakest path.
yeah.
That or
Yeah.
maybe water, but I think water is.
There is creative stuff you can do with it, with Pillar of Fire, Bonds of
Yeah,
Fire,
with Phoenix Fire.
Rage. Phoenix Fire is a good one. There is creative things, but it's still a weak path. Personally, I think at this point in time, I would rate it lower than water, but yeah, it's not the best path.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, great,
we're
I love
all
the
on the
water
same
spell.
page there. But like I said, for what it is, what you're paying for, I think it's serviceable. You know, it's not. I'm not saying it's like necessarily elevating, like HP is positing, but I don't think it's holding back the nation. And there's some things that you can be doing.
Well, what the nation really needs is magic diversity. You guys brought up Ulm earlier. That's another nation that struggles with magic diversity. These nations.
I think the lack of magic diversity on this nation, Maragon and Ulm specifically, are used as a balancing mechanism because
Yeah,
they
I
have
don't
other
think they're
strong
very
mechanics.
Yeah, but let's say you're playing against someone and they address your Knights of the Chalice. Now you're leaning everything onto your Witch Hunters, and that's when you really are hurting. So if your Sacreds are ever addressed throughout a point in the game, the nation starts to fall apart, and that's why the Witch Hunter is considered the Shit Hunter, because he cannot carry it.
What's gonna deal with Knights of the Chalice and say like Fire Elementals, for instance?
Cubes hard counter.
Yeah.
So fire resist, they eat cavalry.
What's
they're
what's
big
the
blobs. They just straight hard countered the nation.
Well, I think we consider cubes to be a pretty hard counter to a lot of things that are considered meta.
Yeah, but like not everyone knows how to kill Knights of the Chalice, so that's why Marion is where it is. It's very strong in low skill games, and it's not so strong in high skill games where people know how to kill your Sacreds. That's the duality.
Like, since we keep comparing to like nations like Ulm, right? You look at Ulm, and Ulm does have a similar issue. However, like from a realistic perspective, Ulm's mages are at a point where they can do a lot more than the Witch Hunter, even with like the same paths. Because Ulm has that Master Smith and that Forge and not Master Smith, Forge bonus and the Mundane
That's the
Researcher.
difference in power distribution because like Ulm has no Sacreds, obviously. So the main feature, the main thing that makes Marion strong, obviously, are the Sacreds.
I think it's important to evaluate like a multitude of factors when considering any workhorse mage, and the flexibility of your workhorse mage does matter a lot. And the Witch Hunter does not give you a lot of flexibility. He cannot thug.
Okay, true.
You,
No, he can't thug. All right, effectively.
He cannot effectively thug. He does not have path diversity other than he's Fire 2 and S1. You can plug stuff into your communions, but he does not have any randoms, so he does not break you into other paths. He is just your F2, S1. And
Well,
he's
to be fair,
old. He's old, after 3 years, I believe? So that's another issue with him, but it depends how much you care about
If
that.
your battle mages...
Oh, no, he's old after a year. Yeah. So he's gonna start limping around on the map at 14 map move after a year or 12 turns of you buying it. So you're gonna be massing a bunch of them, and then they're gonna start getting afflictions unless you have unaging, or if you have growth.
yeah, no, you're definitely rolling the dice because of that unfortunate mechanic where fire is increasing your old age threshold. But again, I mean, they're not. We don't think they're overpowered. We don't think they're necessarily that strong, but they're serviceable.
I think they're overcosted for what you're paying.
I think it's unfair to look at them and say shit hunters.
I
I think
I
Fire
don't think
2
so.
is serviceable in the mid game. It helps you get past some things that maybe your Knights of the Chalice can't get through with the Fire Elementals and some of the other spells that we had talked about. So
So I'm all for insulting units unfairly. So call them shit hunters all
Yes.
you want, but but I think you're wrong about the just flexibility of the unit. I think there are a lot of things that you can slot with your just basic astral and then the fire path on top of it, that you can just slot them into a lot of different plays. Even if those plays aren't particularly efficient, just having them as options lets you do switch ups, and that's really how a lot of times you win fights, is by switching up your tactics to beat somebody. Like if they bring full fire res and you can't hurt them with your fire path, switching it to like even something as basic as a mind burn communion, or something like astral fires or astral geyser, or just having those late game like mass army buffs and debuffs in the astral path. Like I think, yeah, you overpay for that, but you could just switch straight out of your fire plan into that, and I think that gives them enough flexibility to push the nation over the top in the late age. Whereas I think the Master Smith, even though he's a better mage generally, especially like Ulm's entire strat, revolves around him. But even though he's a better mage generally, he starts to struggle, and there's very few things you can do with him unless he's rolled a specific random.
In terms of magic flexibility, the Master Synth will absolutely struggle. However, they can get randoms, so that is a difference. But yeah, like I personally, as a player, do not value paying for flexibility, especially through the early and mid game. That flexibility is just dead weight a lot of the time, because you gotta know up front before you even start the game what you're gonna intend your mages to do. And if you could have the same mage, let's say, or the same path of a mage, but not be paying that, you would absolutely take it. Like, the Augur on this nation is insane, but the Witch Hunter on this nation is dog shit. So,
Well, and there's a scenario in which that may not be true, in which is like if you're pumping, because these are going to be primarily possibly your research as well, right? Unless you're doing a lot of initiates.
well,
So if you're going like, if you have gold and you're pumping these out, in a pinch, they're going to be able to service you in a variety of different ways, like with the leader.
Well, but that's where the paths really come to matter, because even if you're sitting on these and researching, there's only so much you can get with the fire. And if you want to do anything with astral, you need a lot of them, and it's very expensive per party to really field these. You field 8 of these, like, that's so much gold compared to other nations. And you're already going to be spending so much money on your sacreds and building citadels, presuming you value citadels. So, like honestly, the Witch Hunter is just, you really have to play the nation to understand, like, how much it hurts. And then, I don't know if you guys have played them in an actual game, but they are very, very frustrating.
Disclaimer, I have not played Marignon in a real game, so...
I have played Marignon in blitzes and in real games.
I play him in a blitz, but yeah, it's been a while, right?
Yeah, you'll notice the two.
Go ahead.
You'll notice that the two have actually played the nation. Don't like the Witch Hunters. I'm just saying.
This guy's low balls? Oh, come on, Darkwolf. You can do better than that.
Come on. No, I mean, most of your commander points also are going towards other useful stuff like paladins, right? You're not
presuming
getting too many of these, but when you are, you can build them for a purpose.
I think it's just...
how would you make them better?
I mean, the way you play Marignon is your first fort, in my opinion, is always going on a tribe province, because you want the N1 over the F2 in the early game. The N1 is way better for early game combat, with like just giving your guys protection is just better than what F2 is going to give you, because F2 really doesn't pop off till you hit your level 5s, right? Or like you could maybe do some stuff with Conj 3 and some little elementals, but with some weird construction to Conj 3 play if you really wanted to do that. But I don't think that's necessary, because the Sacreds should carry you through the early game, and people aren't generally going to have answers. But it really depends based on your situation and based on your bless. Like, if you have an all-resistant bless as this nation, maybe the Sacreds don't carry you as far in the early game, but they scale a little bit better because you have resist. But we have different opinions on resist versus stats. versus the overall community. So
True, that's why we named the podcast.
yeah,
So, like, if you had to keep the fire too, what would you do to make it better? You would just cut out some of the maybe additional
gold cost. Yeah, if the gold was lower, like it would be. It's really, it's like you're paying like an extra 40 or 100 gold.
Do
Not
you
100.
value? Do you value a lower upfront cost or lower upkeep? Is the other thing.
Lower, probably lower upfront cost.
So you prefer it not to be sacred?
I don't know. I would definitely cut some stuff out of this if I could. Like the holy one is like useless, for example. Like
Yeah, 'cause you're
you
not
don't want to
really-
be leading your parties with witch hunters. You can, but you don't. No, you want to
I
be
think
leading your
the-
parties with friars or paladins.
I think the ability to lead parties with witch hunters just adds in like the ability to split very easily, and the ability
Yeah,
to like
you-
bring together armies
could
even
lead
when
a
you're
number of them.
unprepared.
Yeah, but that's not a good thing because like yes, you have the ability to I can split at any time, but your opponent can always see if you can split. So why not just bring a 40 or 30 gold commander to split, right? Just do that. You can make
Yeah,
your
like-
friars out of fort. They're not going to cut away from your commander points. So it's like why not do that? You can make indie commanders out of fort. I don't see why we're valuing, the ability to lead troops. The only thing nice about them to lead troops is they can lead your patrollers because they already have the 10 patrol strength, right? So they're going to be a good patroller. And then if they're holding militia, you don't have to have an indie commander patrolling with them because they can just patrol if you want the patrol strength. So that's a
All right, we're finding uses. There you go.
yeah, but that still doesn't make it a good mage. You're just running with the dog shit you got, and that's what you do as any nation in the game. So
I mean,
it's it's a nothing point.
this is
Like you have to do that.
No, this is a. I'm gonna make this a little spicy troll arc here, but if you have the witch hunters in your armies, which of course you do, you have to. There's no other choice. Then
Sure.
you could not make those indie commanders to split, and then you save the gold that helps you deal with the high gold cost of the witch hunter.
There you
Easy
go.
clap.
Yeah. I mean, you could just lead your parties like a normal player and save the fucking what? The 130. What is that? The 140 gold? Or
Or
is it
bring your-
no, it's 130.
Like you're bringing mages with pretty much every army after a certain point in the game, in my opinion.
Well, I think you should raid without mages because that's efficient. But that's where we disagree.
Yeah, Mari, like, in the context of Marignon, it honestly doesn't have trouble, like, running around with groups of 3 to 4 Knights of the Chalice and taking 15, 20 PD.
True.
Yeah,
with
if
like a
especially
paladin.
if you have a paladin with 3
Yeah.
knights will do
Yeah.
it.
It's the issue Marignon
Yeah, that's
has
not
is
its
running
purpose.
into... Yeah, it's not its purpose, but, like, you're using an example of it splitting. The problem Marignon has is running into enemy armies that can stand against the paladins with, like, body ethereal luck. And after that, the mage doesn't really do much if the enemy has fire reds. And so
Yeah.
it leaves you in this period where your mages are just fucking sitting there jacking off because
I
they can't do shit anymore.
I do want to bring up something that is in the mid game, does not involve fire res, and does involve specifically the fire astral crosspath, and that is astral fires.
Yeah.
That is a level 6.
True.
They're gonna say solar eclipse.
True, but it is also at the point where otherwise they don't get a lot of stuff. Now, granted, they would rather have higher astral and lower fire for it, but with the changes to communion, where I believe you get penetration bonuses based on building your path higher than the spell level, and the way the astral fires scales, you can really yoke them up and get some big armor negating astral fires, like large AoE busts on people. Haven't tested it, but I would like to try it.
Yeah,
I mean, Astral Fires is certainly an interesting thing, and I think it's a cool tool. I don't think it takes away from the mage, certainly. But I also think
So that's diversity in a sense, right?
it's still hard to cast because it's S3, Fire 1, so you're going to need probably an 8. You could do it with a 4, technically,
You do
right? You would do 2 slaves, you power the spheres, and then you can cast it for the straight fatigue
Right.
cost.
Though I would probably include
That'd be a
more
minimum.
slaves in order to,
Well, yeah.
add to it, if I could afford them, of course.
Yeah, and you can light it.
Then it would be 10 fatigue
Yeah,
if
you
you had
can light
4 with Power of the Sphere. So this is all a gem for each of your ones. This is very expensive. Like it will add up.
Yeah, but the main purpose of the Witch Hunter though is in those big battles, right? Like you're not raiding with it. We already talked about you're not raiding with.
I mean,
it.
I'm
Not
counter
putting the
raiding with
value
fire
of
allies,
potentially-
but
What's that HP?
oh, I'm counter raiding with fire elementals or like preparing
you
for
can do
enemy
that,
raids. Like that's
I think that's
Absolutely.
quite expensive when like your knights and paladins can address BD. So you can do it, but I don't think you need to do it.
oh
Does that make
when
sense?
I
He's
when I
talking
say,
about counter raiding and setting up traps.
yeah when I say
Oh,
counter
yeah.
raiding, I mean blocking enemy raiders by adding PD to witch hunters with with fire allies. Like I played Ermor, which you were talking about earlier, the augur, and even having to use an augur elder, which is more expensive, obviously has more pass, can do more things, can
He's
get
loaded
wailing
through
winds,
as well.
but if you had to set up a fire elemental with trap with an augur elder just to kill like just some raiders or something, that was still worth it. And more so with the witch hunter, it's because it's like it's what you have. It's very expendable. If you're being raided, you just send out a few witch hunters to fucking drop fire elementals from your research labs, and then you can stop the raiding fairly easily and cheaply.
I mean, if it's an option that works, it's an option you have. But it all depends on whom you're playing against, your spot in the game. Like, there's going to be various spots where, it's going to depend if you can do that or not. Not every time it's going to
Going
work.
back to my original point, obviously, like HP said, you can counter raid with them. I think it's pretty efficient. You can Phoenix Power, use one fire gem, get a fire elemental out, which beats a lot of what other, like, if people are using air elementals, for instance, that's a lot more cost efficient.
I think
Comparison.
I'm not sure if the air elemental will. I think the air elemental might kill the mage before the fire elemental comes over. I'm not 100% at this time. Who wins that trade? But I think the air elemental still wins because of how targeting works.
Well, if there's
So-
PD though, they would go for the PD, wouldn't they?
Depends. It
Generally.
highly depends.
So
Anyways,
that's a real dice roll.
Yeah.
Anyways,
That's a tough thing.
like I said, it's in the big battlefields, right? So that's when Astral Fires has value. That's when Pillar of Flame has value. That's when a Flamestorm has value. So I think that's what its purpose is, really, as like I said, a role player.
Well, you have to envision this from what the most common Dominion players going to run against. If people are running with all resist sacreds with an all sacred army, Firestorm's going to do jack. Pillar of Fires is not going to get cast, and then you're just leveling on Astral Fires, which you're paying more for at that point.
Well, we mentioned World of Fates and some of the other Astral.
Yeah, there's
Yeah,
Fates.
one of the
And
fates is
actually,
something you want.
that segues into what I wanted to say. I think pretty well is I think another thing to keep in mind with mages is research priorities in the nation they fit in. And I think one of the things that because I think Fire and Astral together actually do have some very useful stuff they can do in a lot of the trees. But it's like one thing per tree with both those paths, minding Thaumaturgy for Astral. But the issue is the nation also, it wants to get Conj 6 for Harbingers to get at that air access. It wants Conj 5 for Elementals. It wants all of these paths, but it gets 1 to 2 things in each of them, or all of these research categories, but it gets 1 to 2 things in each of them. And often, they're towards the middle to the end of the tree.
I don't think that's true. I don't think Thaumaturgy is actually a major research goal for this. What do you?
I would agree. I think if you play this nation,
It's alteration.
you rush alteration to 5, and then you go up conj is how I would play it. Then maybe, after you hit alt, you choose to go up conj or evo. That's how you're gonna play, and you can stop at construction 2 for Mimi stuff, but that's more of an early game thing. But you're generally gonna run up to at least alt 3. Alt 5 gives you solar eclipse. You should always take Spirit Sight with these guys because it's free synergy, right? And then you also cannot take cold resist because you get that at alt 5, but that's more of a tech I do. So there's a lot of reasons to go up alteration. You get protection, you get incinerate, you get solar eclipse, and you get cold resistance. These are all things you can do. You also get swarm at 4 because you're going to be making those tasty indie commanders. There's a lot of value you get about alteration.
Like I said, there's some tools there, and you can pivot based on what you're facing. And even though we agree that all res is kind of overabundant or prolific in the community, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to come across it every time against like the first or second.
More importantly, yes, people take all res sacreds all the time, but by the mid game, their armies are not going to be all sacreds unless they have just not fought anybody. They're going to have to include mundanes in their armies because there's not that many Reckoning or sacreds in the game, and you're one of them. You've already taken it. So Firestorm may not win you the big solo army battle if you're just doom stacking at each other like idiots, but if the enemy's running around with lesser armies that aren't their big sacred idiot stack, then you can go back into fire, and their resists on their sacreds don't matter a damn in a mixed army.
Well, so the mage would get more mileage if people would actually raid, for one, and if people would make things more than their sacreds and their mages. So I would argue as if the community, it's going to sound cynical, gets a little bit better, then your fire path gets more mileage because you can use it for counter raiding, but not everyone raids.
People aren't recruiting troops.
You gotta recruit troops, guys.
Recruit troops.
I mean, people can play however they want, but
Let's go.
You gotta recruit troops so that my take on the Witch Hunter becomes correct.
Well, that's really the best
like fire elementals become pretty good if you're killing the the non-resistant raiders that are walking around looting all your provinces. Yeah, fire is a little better, but granted, you don't need to use those because the knights will probably kill the raiders as well. There's a little bit of a dance that develops when people are raiding and you're raiding and then you're counter raiding. But if there's no dance, then it's just slapping essentially, stacks of crap against each other and see who wins. And that's what a lot of people do. And then they take land very slowly. Instead, you could just take it all at once.
Amazing how many people who play Dominions don't actually want to play Dominions. They want to do something else.
People will talk about Dominions for 12 hours a day. They'll know about the effectiveness of raiding, and they still won't raid. That's a whole.
Look, it's a lot of work. Clicking and making arrows is a lot of work.
Oh,
give people
my red arrows are so hard.
Oh, I can't get the red arrows on the map. Oh no.
I can't make a little indie commander to lead my guys. Alright.
Hey, some people get carpal tunnel.
Those are some of the hot takes on the All Stats No Res podcast. Do you want to wrap it up?
I think we could wrap up the segment there.
So, again, going from back to my original point, I think it's perfectly serviceable. Could it be better? Absolutely. Is it great? No. But, again, not holding the nation back, doing a lot of things with it, it still retains usefulness, right? Because you have to build it.
I'm always going to be of the mindset it is the shit hunter. It's how other people have talked to me about the mage. I think you're absolutely going to make it if you play the nation. You should make it. It's still the shit hunter. He's going to do all your jobs for you. You're going to hate buying him. You're going to hate moving him around. You're going to hate making your big communions to fight in these obnoxious fights when you fight them. But you're going to make him. He sucks. You're going to find better mages across your ages. You're going to wonder why why don't you have these ones in your nation? But, you just have to suck it.
I still think it's Pog. I will admit that the current meta makes it less Pog. And for all my confidence, I did have a little bit of a struggle deciding which way I wanted to go before the episode. So it's not full 100% as confident as I'm presenting it. But I think if you take a broader picture and look at how badly some of the other well thought of mages would do as a nation's only main mage, then you start thinking of these guys as a little bit better, and that's where I'm at.
Salamanders. Let's put it that way.
They aren't the worst fire mage in the game. They are not the salamander.
Yeah. MA salamanders. Oh.
Yeah, he's the same price, but you get no astral, and he's old.
I think we're
all right.
No,
So
no.
You have a bar set at least.
we are missing the Wolf conclusion. Wolf.
Yeah. My conclusion is pretty simple. It's a shit mage. I'd rather have the vast majority of other mages in that slot, but it doesn't make the nation worse. It just doesn't make it any better than if you had any other mage.
Except the salamander, no astral.
Except the salamander. Most of the fire
We can agree on that.
Overpriced.
Wait, I like how no one brought up, by the way, that Marion, even with the bless bonuses, this mage doesn't help it. But They didn't even need to bring up the fact. Whoa, doesn't Marion get a bless bonus? Yeah, and this mage does not
Yeah.
help that.
I mean, it's not
It's
relevant, but
totally
you-
irrelevant. The
you
bless
put
bonus is
Farcast
totally
here, right?
irrelevant.
Well,
Well,
you would.
no, you would. Farcast.
Dude,
Well,
I was messing.
mage
I was
blesses.
messing up on that.
They're not cloud. They don't get clouds, so Farcast.
Yeah, I would not take a mage bless on like someone with the Knights of the Chalice. You just don't have space for it, you know? Like even with the astral bonus, it's like, well, you're either taking a big stupid incarnate or you're taking magic weapons. And then fit your
only-
mage
Oh,
bless
you
onto that.
actually-
Like, you know, it sucks.
The
You would have space if the mage was good.
Sorry.
No.
So the only thing I can think of with Farcaster, maybe you could do. I don't think there's any spells, but you know the close range spells that a lot of people struggle to use. You maybe with the math and some weird boosters can get value out of maybe like Flame Eruption being more range, but that's still like farther off like to get value out of. You could surprise people, but it's really hard to pay for. I think you mostly should take a Knights of the Chalice Bless of this nation. I think the ideal build is, in my opinion, hidden in some sort of build that lets you use Flagellants in Knights of the Chalice, but most people disagree with me. But yeah, doing a Mage Bless on this nation is definitely like that's your third option.
Well, if you put a mage bless on this nation, it's just because you wanted a mage bless, you know, and that's
Yeah,
the
like,
case
you
with
could take
most
any
mage
bless.
blesses. But I think there's some nations where you can take a mage bless. You don't really have sacreds that you
Most
care
nations
about.
don't take mage blesses. So.
Right.
Yeah, they're very hard to get value out of, but clouds are very strong, and if surprising people with increased range is powerful.
You heard it here first, folks. Witch hunters are.
Mixed decision. Still, nobody convinced over the course of the episode.
All right, so that was it for our Pog or Dog segment. That's the only segment we're going to have for this week's episode, being our first episode. Leave your comments below. Tune in next week's podcast for our subject, which is going to be Awake Pretenders. That should be pretty spicy. So that's it from all of us here at All Stats No Red.